So here we are, a spiritual community. We're a center for spiritual growth. The question is, why are we here? Now, I had a neighbor in my very first church, my next door neighbor. He thought he recognized my voice somehow, and it turned out that he used to call my dial-a-prayer at the company that he worked at, and then he would put it on hold and then put it through on the intercom system to his co-workers and have it ring and then pick up and be my dial-a-prayer. So when we were talking, I told him what I did for a living. He says, "Oh my gosh, you're the guy." And in fact, I was a minister. He said, "Hey, yeah, I go to the local church here." But his reason for going to church was, he said, when his dating life got a little slow, he'd just pick up a Bible, go to the church, and he'd find lots and lots of people to go and date. Now, is that a reason to go to church? I don't know. So why do we go to church? What is this spiritual community about? Are we common? Yeah, you think it's a pretty good idea. But what is it that we're here for? Are we here? You know, if you looked at the map of your beingness, and you are a very complex being, many different expressions, a multiplicity of lifetimes and experiences, subpersonalities and different states of consciousness, and there was that little arrow that said, "You are here," where would it be? Would it be in the center of you? Would it be in that wellspring of life and love and wisdom, that part of you that wants to express outward from within? Would that inner hidden splendor come forth? You know, that's that famous poem from William Butler Yeats. No, from Robert Browning. See, you got me going. Robert Browning. There is an inmost center in us all where truth abides in fullness, and to know rather consists in opening out a way whence the imprisoned splendor may escape, than effecting entry for a light supposed to be without. That's why Galileo said you can never teach anyone anything. Instead, you can only help them discover what is within themselves. There is that which is within you that needs to come forth. And you say, well, I want an answer. I want it out here and I want it now. But think about it. If you wanted to grow apples, would you water the apples? Would you pay attention to the apples? No. You'd water the root, not the fruit. I water the root, not the fruit. Together? I water the root, not the fruit. How do you do that? You do it through your spiritual practices, through your meditation, through your prayer, through your affirmations. Remember the woman Lucy Rector I shared about, who was in stage 4 cancer, and because of the problems with medical insurance, which thankfully have been rectified in recent months, but she was not able to get medical insurance, so she couldn't get treatment for months. And during that time, she should have, according to the doctors, died. But when they finally opened her up, not only did they not find stage 4 cancer, they didn't find anything. And they were terribly apologetic for their mistake, but she knew what had happened. What had happened? She'd watered the root, not the fruit. I water the root, not the fruit. Together? I water the root, not the fruit. Meaning, because she couldn't really run around and get it handled in the outer world, and there's nothing wrong with medical treatment, but because she had that choice off the table, she took a walk every day. She wasn't a big meditator. She wasn't big on a bunch of mystical spiritual practices. But she took a walk every day and said her affirmations. Do you ever do that? Do you take your time every day meditating and going deep within that wellspring? Or walking around in your outer world and taking the time in your outer world to say the affirmations that are the desire of your heart and soul and mind and strength? Do you connect with your spiritual source and get in touch with that wellspring and let it out? Remember that meeting with Jesus and the woman at the well? Remember he had gone to that part of the country where he wasn't supposed to be because those other people lived there. And there he was in the middle of the day, and there was not only one of those other people, but it was a single woman. And he was not allowed to speak to her because she was unclean. And it was totally against his religion. And there he was asking her for some water, which was totally against all the rules. And she said, well, I don't think you're supposed to be talking to me. And he said, if you knew, I can give you waters which you do not know of. And these waters spring forth from within the being. He said the waters will spring forth, living waters. And what are those living waters? That's that source of life force energy from the center of your being that is ready to move out and nourish and sustain you and meet your needs. This is the center of spiritual growth. It's not a place of comfortableness. of keeping everything the same and being in complacency. It's not a place of status and putting ourselves up on pedestals. It's a place where we roll up our sleeves and we get to work with our spiritual practices. I roll up my sleeves, I get to work with my spiritual practices. Together, I roll up my sleeves, I get to work with my spiritual practices. That means getting off the idea that we've got it all together. Boy, I remember when my spiritual teacher, Jane Elizabeth Hart, told me, Greg, when you think you're really doing poorly, you're probably doing really well. And when you think you're doing really well, you're probably not doing so well. We don't know how we're doing, but we do know this. The one thing we have control over is what we're doing each day in our spiritual practices. And when we find ourselves in a time of crisis, that's the time when we reach down deep. And we bring up those great spiritual resources and we put them to work. And those are the richest times of life. On November 29, 1963, May Rowland, who had been running Silent Unity for 50 years, got a phone call from Jackie Kennedy. John F. Kennedy had been assassinated 7 days earlier. And when it was time to clean out his desk, because Johnson had to go into the Oval Office and take that, it was an office. And she asked if she could be the person that went through the desk. And in the top middle drawer, the main drawer of the desk, she opened it up and there was an affirmation from Silent Unity. Now, how many of you have written or called Silent Unity, had them send you an affirmation? Remember that affirmation that I shared, my sister, my mom received? You are God's whole and perfect child, the glow of God's light, life, and wisdom. And my mom used that in that crisis to effect healing, and my sister was healed of her birth defects. Well, it turns out Jackie Kennedy, as she saw this, saw where it came from, brought it to John F. Kennedy's personal secretary, Evelyn Lincoln, and asked her, "What's this about?" And she said, "Oh, I gave it to him during the Cuban Missile Crisis of the year before." That prayer was put forth in Silent Unity for all the world leaders. And it was sent out to everybody on the Unity mailing list, and Evelyn Lincoln was a Unity student. And it said this: "Through the Christ mind, you are unified in thought, purpose, and understanding for the security and freedom of all mankind." And so she gave it to John F. Kennedy. He put it on his desk and he read it every day, over and over and over again, keeping it foremost in his mind, kept it foremost in his consciousness. Now, the historians, with the information we have today, we suspected it at the time, but we know for sure that that's the closest we ever came, and we came this close to thermonuclear disaster. World War III almost happened. I remember being on the schoolyard in elementary school at the age of 9, and we were worried about whether we'd even be back at school the next day, but we had no idea how close it came. But he said this prayer over and over again. "Through the Christ mind, you are unified in thought, purpose, and understanding for the security and freedom of all mankind." He watered the root, not the fruit. Yes, he took care of business. But there was something in him that resonated with this divine idea. Is it possible that this prayer from Silent Unity may have helped to avert World War III? Who knows? We'll never know. But we do know this: if you're looking for spiritual answers in your life, if you're looking for a solution to your problem, realize the answer is not going to be found taking your watering can and watering the apples. Going out into your world and trying to fix everything, you have to take action. Yes, that's to be sure. But the answer is found within you, deep within you, in that wellspring. And you may not be a big-time mystic. You may not be somebody who's going to spend a lot of time in silence. But you may be. Maybe that is the step you need to take. I was just reading an interview with the Dalai Lama, and he participated in the study with the University of Wisconsin. And the University of Wisconsin was putting people, and here's some of my nerd talk, so get ready. They took people from all walks of life and put them in an MRI, and they checked their brain waves and tried to see what was active and what wasn't active. And they found, through their tests, that people who were the most anxious and upset they had a lot of brainwave activity in their reptilian brain, no wonder, and the right front cortex. Why? Because that's the flight or fight You can run away from the danger. But people who were peaceful and calm and engaged and excited about life and optimistic had brainwave activity in the left frontal cortex. And further, they found that if people meditated, that the energy would move from the right to the left over a period of time, and it would permanently reset itself. And they found that if people for 2 weeks only spent 20 minutes a day meditating, using some very basic techniques, that it would change the set point farther to the left, to the happier side, and it would be permanent. It would go back a little, but it would never go back to where it was. In other words, you can retrain your brain. Now realize, your spiritual practices aren't about your brain. It is an outer form of an inner experience, but isn't that interesting? And as they did this, they found that the most extreme and positive, beneficial result of being in the left hemisphere of the brain was found from those people who meditated the most, and the Dalai Lama was off the charts. Why? Because every morning he gets up and he meditates, in his case, for a couple of hours. Now, most of us aren't going to do that. But they found that anything helped. Any amount helped. And it was permanent. Oh, you go back a little, but it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. What is your spiritual practice? What can you do to water the root? You could be like Lucy Rector and just say your affirmations while you're walking, if that's where you're at. The more you do, the better it is. But take the energy and the effort. You say, oh, this isn't going to make much difference. Who's to say that John F. Kennedy, taking that time every day, in the middle of the worst, most anxious crisis perhaps the world has ever known before or since, that he took that time and he took those words and he took them into his being and his consciousness, that it may have made that much of a difference. But in your life, what can you do? You know, it can be little things. I remember when I was in college and I put myself through school selling brushes door to door. And my meditation teacher said to me, now what you need to do is you see it as so spiritual work. In other words, water the root. See yourself as serving people, not selling them brushes. So this is what you do. Before you go up to every house, just visualize white light. And she gave me an affirmation to use to bless everybody in the house. And she said, now don't do it to sell brushes. That's cheating. She says, do it with no thought of the outcome. You see, dedicating the outcome to God, releasing the outcomes is the most powerful thing you can do because it makes it far more powerful. Remember Brother Lawrence? Back around 1600, he was the lowest of the lowest of the lowest in his monastery because he was the guy who washed the dishes and peeled the potatoes. But he dedicated it to God and he released all of the outcomes to God, and people could see that he was different. So they'd write him, and he wrote just a few letters explaining this to people. And what has survived? In the Catholic Church and the mystics, nobody else's writings from that period of time have survived and been proliferated as much as Brother Lawrence, the guy who peeled the potatoes, because what he was doing was dedicating the action to God. And so she shared this with me, and I read Brother Lawrence's Practice of the Presence. I highly recommend it. It's very short, very simple, and he was a simple man. He was not learned, he was not particularly educated, but he dedicated his potato peeling to God. So I dedicated my brush selling to God, and I ended up with the highest sales in 3 counties per hour. But I didn't do it for that purpose. She said, if you do that, you're cheating, because Jesus said you've got to not let your left hand know what your right is doing. Make your giving from your heart, not for outer show. And so you detach your outcomes. That's watering the root, not the fruit. So I dedicate my action to God. Together? I dedicate my action to God, and I dedicate the results of my action to God. Together? And I dedicate the results of my action to God. Now you see, I'm in a crisis, I'm anxious, I don't like what's going on, and I don't know how to calm myself. You know, I was going through a time like that once in my life a few years ago, and I felt out of control. You ever feel like that? And so what I did was I took, thank you God, thank you God, thank you God, together. Thank you God, thank you God, thank you God. And I used it, because you know you have a hard time sleeping at night when you're going through something like that. I used it as a progressive relaxation technique. What I would do is that as I lie there, I'd start with my toes. And I would say, thank you God, thank you God, thank you God, mentally, and visualize white light in my toes, then up to my feet and my ankles, and all the way up through every body part, from my fingers all the way through to the top of my head. And I usually would never get to my head because I'd fall asleep. But powerful things can happen if you say, thank you, God, thank you, God, thank you, God, together. Thank you, God, thank you, God, thank you, God. Catherine Ponder, the great Unity writer, once was counseling somebody who was so negative, had so many complaints, and had so many things going on that Catherine Ponder could not get through to her at all. And she said to her, the woman had a lot of physical challenges. Catherine Ponder said, well, where you need to start, she just intuitively got this, is to praise the health in some part of your body that's healthy. And the woman said, no part of my body's healthy. And she said, no, there's got to be some part that's not hurting. No, every single part of my body's hurting. Okay, fine. How about your little finger? My little finger's hurting. How about the tip of your little finger? The tip of my little finger's hurting. How about your little fingernail? Well, I suppose my little fingernails are hurting. Start there. And the woman actually did it. Began the process of saying, thank you, God, thank you, God, thank you, God, for the health in the little fingernail, and it moved to one part to another, and she effected a complete healing, according to Catherine Ponder. Now, this is a powerful thing. But these principles truly work. They work because they have been demonstrated by people who've been willing to water the root, not the fruit. One of my classmates in ministerial school was Marianne Bowers, and she was Catherine Ponder's editor. And she wrote this. She said her books have reached people throughout the world and have brought light and truth and healing and abundance to thousands because she believes what she teaches and practices it. She already has done all these things she tells the reader to do. That's how she knows they work. And I know this is true because I've seen her do them. The reason why prosperity and abundance flows so freely to her is that she's never, ever put things first in her life. She always puts God first, and then all the things simply are added unto her, which is, of course, exactly what Jesus taught us, isn't it? Seek first the kingdom, and all those things will be added unto you. Or, as Jesus said, do not lay up treasures on earth where moth and rust can destroy and thieves can break in and steal. Lay up treasures in heaven. And so, what is that? That is the spiritual nature of your being. What is that part of yourself where moths and rust can destroy and thieves can break in and steal? That's where the arrow's pointing in the outer. That's that part of you where, yeah, people can do this and do that. Circumstances can do this and do that. But that treasure of you is within you, and it can never be taken from you. When you leave this life, all that stuff that you're worried about, that I'm worried about, all that status and what people think of you, and all those things that are material, you're not going to have them, but you're going to have one thing. Your consciousness, your beingness, your awareness. Lay up your treasures there, where thieves cannot break in and steal, where moth and rust cannot destroy. Take that consciousness within your beingness and move with it. It's like I remember Jane Elizabeth Hart telling me it's like flowing in water. She says, you're thinking of things in kind of a rigid way, Greg. Instead, realize that your heart energy in which you can live is like a flowing energy, like moving through water. It flows. And you let go of your rigidity, but it's often the crisis itself, the thing that gets you out of your rigid thinking, that allows you to become more flexible. Here's some more nerd talk. They found studies of brain plasticity. What they found is that people who can change their consciousness and have their whole being change are people often who are willing to do something to get themselves out of their complacency. That's why people do zip lines and go to ropes courses and jump out of airplanes and walk on coals, or whatever they're doing is to get themselves out of their familiar complacency. The Unity Church in Fayetteville, Arkansas had gone through a lot of traumatic things. They'd gone through a lot of tough things. And they got together and somebody got a divine idea. They said, let's have a service, but not tell anybody, where all the chairs are turned around to the back of the room. We do the service in the back of the room. And they said that just the shock, and there were a few people that couldn't handle it and they left, But the shock of doing something different moved them from what was complacent. Now, we read about this because we were going to make some changes in the church I was serving at the time, and we couldn't turn things around because there were bolted down pews. So what do? We thought, let's do our service starting with the peace song and the prayer for protection, and move all the way to end with the opening statement. Of course, we took the offering later in the service in case anyone came in late, but everything else was in the opposite level, and it moved the energy. What do you need to do in your life? You need to rearrange some furniture. You need to change some things. You need to do something in your life, and it's not so much the outer thing, but do something to change your consciousness. When I went through my divorce 34 years ago in 1980, I really took stock of my life, and two things made the biggest difference for me. The first thing was that I had held myself back in my life from expressing and doing a lot of things. And it was time for me, all bets were off. I could change my consciousness. So I went and I learned how to play tennis and golf and skiing, and I began to run and do different things, and it's interesting. And I don't do any of them now except for running, and I barely do that. I kind of go like this with the dog, but still, I got out of my comfort zone. I made myself experience different things in life. And it created a brain plasticity that opened me up to receiving new good. Second thing was, Mary Catherine McDougall, the Unity Minister who wrote the book on treasure mapping, showed up in our church and taught a unit on treasure mapping. And treasure mapping is simply visual prayer. And she said, simply take, and she brought them in, some beautiful poster board in different colors, and then take pictures of the consciousness that you would like to have, the things that you would like to experience in your life, and put them up there on it, and then take some affirmations and write them down. And I did that. And starting then, things began to move, things began to change, and my life never went back. What can you do in little ways to create a visual prayer, to take something and put it up on your nightstand or on your mirror in your bathroom, to work with some spiritual principles? What can you do to change your consciousness, to change your awareness, and to push the reset button in your life? I push the reset button in my life. Together, I push the reset button in my life. One of the things that we need to do is look at and see, where is the root? We've been thinking that the problem is this thing or that thing. Maybe it's something completely different. Maybe the thing that's going to shift it is something that has never occurred to us. I've been working with somebody and having a lot of judgments. Do you ever do that? And thinking, well, if they just would make this phone call and do this thing and take these steps as I have them in mind, their problems would all be solved. And doggone it, they never do it, do they? And what came to me was, there's a reason why. There's something deeper. There's something deeper. And Lynn helped me with this too, to point out there's something deeper. And what is that thing? It's always a fear. It's always something that is maybe rooted in childhood or maybe even pre-existence. Something that needs to be surfaced. I've often shared about my friend who was a beekeeper and how when they want to move the hive from one place to another, they just get the queen bee and move the queen bee, and then the entire hive will move over. And so all of the outer effects in your world will change if you find that one concept. And during the meditation at the end of this talk, we're going to ask for that to be revealed within us, to see what it is that we need to shift. And in this case, it was a fear. It was a fear of something. What is it that you're afraid of? What is it, if you did get this answer, what would keep you from accepting it? What is it that you're afraid might happen? So each one of us can do that right now. Each one of us can take into our beingness that something that is at the root of the problem that we're facing in life. And the beauty of asking in meditation and prayer is you don't have to get the answer consciously. It will filter into your beingness as you give thanks for it, and you will find that as the days and weeks go on, it'll show up. You'll know. Something will happen. Somebody will hand you a book. A book will fall off a shelf by itself. Something will happen that will give you the answer that you need. So I'm going to invite you to take a deep breath and let it out. And just say, God, we're through water and the fruit. We're letting go of that idea that we're out on the periphery of our beingness. And we want to move to the very center of our being. That you are here is the I am that I am at the center of us. And we rest in, sink in, and deepen ourselves in that presence. That I am presence. And with our awareness rooted in the center, the source of pure beingness within us, we say, if there is a core belief or something that we need to see about something, reveal it to us so that we can have a complete shift in our beingness. And we're going to take a moment to just go into quiet and not think and not even try to get the answer. Just kind of quiet the mind. God, what we're looking for is soul healing, spiritual growth, the essence of who we are, the living waters flowing forth from the very center of our being out into our world. We give you thanks. So be it. So it is. Amen. And this is that sacred time in our service where we take a deep breath, we let it out, and I'm going to ask you to set aside all papers, anything that's distracting you, anything that you can use to keep from going deeper within. And realize that your identity has many, many parts, many expressions. But the question is, where is the you are here? Where does that arrow point? And again, take a deep breath and let it out. And settle in. Sink into the I am that I am. That part of you that is the root. That part of you that is the wellspring. Remember the words of the Master at the well. I have living waters of which you do not know. Living waters which spring forth and well up and pour forth into our world. We don't have to rely on the outer world for our answers or our identity. The opinions of other people or that outer persona, that mask that we sometimes wear. We retreat. We move into and drop into that I am identity. We sink into the presence that is at the root of us, the wellspring. The I am there. God, wherever I have taken my attention and put it falsely in the outer world for my source, I want to take it now and put it within. And so I feel myself moving deeply within. I feel myself flowing as I touch into these living waters. And I allow the wellspring of my I am identity to flow up and flow forth. And move out into my world. I flow with my I am identity. I flow with my I am identity. Whether I call that infinite self, that presence, the Christ, the divine self, the soul, the spirit, cannot be encompassed by words or names. It is an experience. Not to be sought outside, but to be known within. The hidden splendor that is released when I sink into and release myself to the flow of the living waters of Spirit. I flow with the hidden living waters of my inner spirit. I flow with the hidden living waters of my inner spirit. As I rest and let go. The I am that I am identity is where I am. It is the you are here of me. And whatever the need is in my world, I can release it. I can dwell in calm peace. I do not let the outer circumstances disturb me because my source is sure. My answers are coming forth. My actions spring forth from within. And all is well. And so it is. So we're going to take our offering now. And I give from the core of my being, and I receive freely. I give from the core of my being, and I receive freely. Together, I give from the core of my being, and I receive freely. And silently. And again aloud together. I give from the core of my being, and I receive freely. And so it is.